García Molina, and we have three panelists, very important panelists, people who know Héctor in different way. Let me, before to introduce our panelists, let me say some words about Héctor Garcia. He was a great and talented man, intelligent and humility, whose name is among those in the heights of the computer science. Héctor is widely recognized for has been the mentor of great Silicon Valley leaders. His alumni were founders of great global companies like Oracle, Cisco, and of course, many of know, Google. Héctor graduated from the Technology of Monterrey in 1974 and he studied his master and PhD at the Stanford University. After 10 years at Princeton, he returned as researcher at Stanford. To know more about this exemplary Mexican source of inspiration, who passed away in November 2019, just 3 years ago, we invite to this round table personalities who had the opportunity to share with him some of the experience. Our panelists, Professor Jeffrey Ullman, Professor Andrea Pepcle, and Professor Carlos Coelho. Please, Professor Ullman, give us a short introduction for yourself.
Hi. Okay. Well, I guess I had the odd opportunity to hire Hector twice. When I was at Princeton, I guess it was 1979 when Hector graduated from Stanford. Well, we hired him there. It was a great, I think, opportunity to build up our systems group. At that time, it was hard to find academics who were willing to do real systems work, as Hector always did. Anyway, that year I left for Stanford. Hector spent 10 years at Princeton doing some very interesting things. I mean, you can argue that he really had the first idea for a RAID disk, and he did something called the massive memory machine. I mean, it was a very interesting project. It had maybe 1/32 of the memory of your cell phone, but for the time it was a tremendous. If it had like I think it was a quarter of a gigabyte of memory at a time when machines typically had a megabyte or something. So they were able to explore sort of, the way computation would be done in the future. Then anyway, 10 years later, I guess it was 89. I was actually chair of the department at Stanford at the time, and we have a tradition at Stanford of sort of rating people from Princeton, and I got rated at one point. And so I said, why don't we bring Hector over? And we did. And it was basically he really started the database group as a thing at Stanford, and it was very a very powerful group, I think. I'm going to talk about that, I guess, later. But anyway, so, I mean, that's for the moment the end of the story, I guess.
Thank you. Please, Andreas, if you can introduce yourself.
Yes. Hi. Good morning. I assume you can hear me. Yes. Okay. Yeah. So I have a PhD in computer science from the University of Karlsruhe. And after that, I spent 10 years at the Hewlett-Packard Research Lab in Palo Alto, and then 2 years at Xerox PARC. And that's where Hector found me. He had just joined Stanford, and he had landed a large grant in digital libraries that spanned multiple universities. And he was looking for a director for this project. And he was a very charming person and a very convincing one. And so he worked on me for quite a while to leave this secure, well-paid industry job, to take this shaky, soft money university job with less pay. But every time I visited, he showed me an office and said, "That could be your office." And so eventually I went and I joined. I became the director of that digital library project, and then, for reasons that I will explain, it turns out that all my industry friends were laid off multiple times over the years, and yet I was able to stay at Stanford because of Hector's care and talent, and we worked together for 25 years. Project followed project. We wrote the grants together, and then we just changed with the time. Our interests adjusted, and I will say more a little bit in response to the questions. Good morning, all.
Thank you very much. Please, Carlos.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Carlos Cuello. I'm at the Computer Science Department of Simvestab in Mexico City. And in my case, my first experience with Héctor was when we invited him to give a talk. This was back in 2008. The Department of Computer Science of Simvestab has a funny story because it started as a section of the electrical engineering department, and it was supposed to become a department in 2 years. It took us 23 years to become a department. So in 2006, we became a department, and in 2008, well, I was the first chair for 2 terms, 8 years. 2008, we decided to celebrate the 25 years of creating the section, which was not really a department, so we call it 25 years of computer science at Simvestab. And we wanted to invite really high-profile researchers to be our keynote speakers. And somebody suggested Héctor's name, which I have to be honest, I was not really familiar with him. And I look up in the internet and found out this was a very interesting guy, and he was Mexican. So we thought we will try, but it's very likely he won't even answer. But not only he answered, but he accepted to come to Mexico City. He gave a wonderful talk. And he was a very friendly guy in the sense, and this is something a good friend told me, somebody who knew him better than me, Sergio Rashbaum. He told me that one of the interesting things about Héctor was not only he was not pretentious or a very arrogant guy, but he made you feel like you were long-term friends with him after you met him. And this made you feel very comfortable to talk to him. So we invited him a few other times. I remember the last time that we invited him, I think it was Francisco who did it, and he made a funny request. He said, yeah, I will accept only with one condition, that I want to fly business, but you won't have to pay for it. I will pay for it because I have enough money to do it. But only if you accept that condition, I will go. And say, of course, you can come. We will reimburse you economy class fare for you to come to Mexico. But he was a very friendly guy who was always interested in keeping in touch with people from Mexico. And I will tell you later on a story about a dinner we had in the apartment of Sergio Rashbaum. We had a dinner with Héctor several years ago. And he told us many stories, and he was telling us about his hobbies, about his work at Stanford and all this. And he was really a very interesting character, one of those which you feel lucky that you were able to meet him. So for those of us who were able to meet him and talk to him, I think it was a very nice experience, and we have very fond memories from him.
Okay, thank you very much. Let us start with the first round of questions, and it is to know something more than you can find in Wikipedia about Héctor García Molina. That's why we invite these persons that actually know in different ways and can share us this the experience to share some moments with the actor in the work or our students. Professor Ullman, the first question is how Hector could be able to manage or have this interesting relationship with the students, but at the end was connected with huge companies. So, because he was very famous Hector for that.
Yes, thanks. Okay, I want to talk about really two things I learned from Hector about dealing with students. The first was to get students working on what he called the 90% solution. And I think that means really two different things depending upon how you sort of the nature of the problem that they're working on. But I want to give you an example. If you remember yesterday, I talked about the relational algebra as a database query language. And because it's sufficiently specialized that the optimization is actually decidable, that you can find in finite time the best query equivalent to a given one. But it's not tractable, right? There's presumably no polynomial algorithm. So if a student wanted to work on optimizing relational algebra, the first thing Hector would say was go find out how people are actually using it. Okay, that is not any random expression of relational algebra is equally likely to be used. So see what queries really look like, and then try to capture 90% of that in a tractable subcase. Okay, I guess that would be the best way to think about it. And the other aspect of the 90% solution is, okay, maybe you'd like to get the optimal algorithm, but that's too hard, and it still could be intractable. So find the way that's 90. Find an algorithm that's efficient and gets you 90% of the way there. Okay. So, and this is maybe it's not the way theoreticians think, but it's. I've always found it to be really good advice in selecting problems, and if you're a faculty member, helping your students select problems. The second thing was the way he organized a research group. Well, as I said, when Hector joined Stanford, databases was really just me and his advisor, Gio Wiederhold, who unfortunately couldn't participate in this today. But he wanted to build something strong, and what he did was he said, okay, we're going to get all the students who are interested in database systems. We're going to pay for their lunch once a week. So every Friday lunch, all of the database students and faculty, and then later when people like Andreas joined, would come in there and would have lunch together. And we would take turns giving 20-minute talks on what our research was, so that students got to know not only what their particular project was, but people, in sort of related areas. And remember, I'm kind of a theoretical guy, so my students were doing database theory of Hector's or Gio's, and then later Jennifer Whittam joined us. Their students were doing typically much more pragmatic, systems-y kinds of things. But we all learned, we shared a more expansive culture by, basically by, if you feed somebody, they come to the talk. So we got, we really got to know about things that were not in, let's say, in our wheelhouse, were not the things that we were really most intensely interested in. It had another interesting idea of Hector's was, in addition to technical talks, we would have trip reports. Anybody in the group who had done something interesting, if they'd gone to a conference, they'd tell a little bit about what was at the conference. And Andreas probably gave the best trip reports of all. He has a motorcycle which he has taken across the United States several times, and very often he would when he came back he would tell us of some a really strange adventure. I don't know whether Andreas is going to talk about that, but anyway, what this had a very interesting effect. People got to know sort of intimate details of each other's lives, and the group students sort of they felt involved in each other's life. Now, among other benefits of this this approach, we found was one other function of the weekly lunch was, if you were giving a talk at a conference, you would rehearse your talk at the lunch, and the students felt free because everybody was everybody's friend. You could make a criticism that was helpful, and it wouldn't be taken as, oh, there's somebody in the group trying to, get ahead of me and one up me. It was your friend, okay. And this was really Hector's idea, and the thing that, again, I think the thing that for many years this group, I think did pretty great things for the students.
Thank you. Yeah, this was a great professor for the students. And of course, I will ask to Andreas that extend this, his opinion. As researcher, how do you work with, what would like to work with Héctor as researcher?
Yeah, so I think if you take one point away from this event, it is to understand that Hector did not have ego problems, and that lack of ego problems was really at the root of much that Hector did and was able to accomplish socially with the group and with me. I observed, for instance, that I mentioned that multiple universities were involved in the initial project, the Digital Libraries project, and some other principal investigators at other times, they very jealously guarded the attendance of meetings, the important meetings, like with funders. And that was, sort of executive suite kind of business. And Hector didn't do that. For those other PIs, that was it was a lifter of their ego a little bit, right? That they were the ones that were doing that were attending. And Hector, routinely, it was obvious that Andreas, come, there's this meeting. And he did the same with students. His PhD students, he just had them attend those meetings with funders because, after all, we all had to learn the business side of research. So on travels, who gives the talk that makes the project shine? And it was either Hector, it was me, and it was very clear that Hector had no problem at all sharing credit. And that really, just a little bit like the database lunches, freed us to really grow and not feel sort of pressed down from above. have also the organizational memory that develops when you work together for a long time across a number of students. Now, he did the money, but every year or two he sat me down to a chat, that as he called it, and I always dreaded that. He said, Andreas, I love working with you. I'd love to continue working with you, but for you, it would be better if you sought a faculty job somewhere else. For your career, that would be better. And it took me a few of those chats to get rid of the feeling of he wants to get rid of me, and feeling really awful about it. Until they realized that he really did want me to stay, but he did have my best in mind. And I decided this was, working with Hector at Stanford with the students that were there was really what I wanted to do. So I never did follow his advice, but I grudgingly, in a way, appreciated what he was trying to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Carlos, Hector is in some ways huge known for us in Mexico because we had not the opportunity to share with him most of his experience, of his knowledge. And I would like to ask you, how was the interaction of Hector with the community in computer science in Mexico?
Sorry. Yeah. Recently, I was trying to find out through Sergio Rasban, who knew him better, about the. Yeah, sorry. It turns out that he had several interactions besides the invited talks. He was invited several times to Mexico. Several years ago, it's just that the interaction was with a different generation of computer scientists, not my generation, sort of the generation before. So I contacted several people, and actually they had met him many years ago at conferences on distributed systems, particularly on databases, distributed databases, which was one of the main areas of Héctor. And they interacted with him, and they told me that they approached him, and actually, for example, Sergio invited him to some workshop at UNAM several years ago, and he came. So he was interacting very often. Also, I know Tecnológico de Monterrey, because he was an alumni from there, and his father was the general dean of Tec de Monterrey many years ago. He kept in touch with them. He still interacted several times with them, and I believe he was also invited sometimes, for example, to be a jury of an award, a research award that Tec de Monterrey gives. So he was visiting Mexico relatively often, at least I will say once a year or once every 2 years. And he was also very clear, because I asked him directly once, that he could not commit for longer stays in Mexico, because he was very busy in the US. That when he said he had many things to do, not only at Stanford, but also he was sitting in the boards of several companies. But he wanted to cooperate somehow. He wanted to interact more with Mexicans. So in some cases, for example, Sergio told me that he encouraged him to suggest brilliant students to try to apply to Stanford. And in those cases, Héctor was some sort of a facilitator. And this was very interesting because some of these students, Sergio told me of one particular case, didn't even work under Héctor. They ended up writing the PhD thesis with somebody else, but still, this was a Mexican, and Héctor was a facilitator for him to get accepted at Stanford. He would help him to know the path to apply and all that. And he was interested in knowing also, in a way, what was going on in Mexico in his own area. And his talks were also very inspiring. I was lucky enough to attend 2 of his talks. And he was never really looking for acting as sometimes happens to us as Mexicans. When I was chair of my department, this happened to me several times, that we tried to sign some agreement with some US university, and basically they only wanted us to send students without any sort of interaction. Send your students and we have scholarships for them, but we don't want to cooperate. Héctor was much more cooperative in that sense, and he was also very straight in the sort of interaction he expected. And I think, of course, besides that, he was an inspiration for many people. It was very interesting to find out some years ago in a news program, they had this short sort of note talking about the guy who was the professor of the founders of Google and all this. And the note was sort of in the sense that this was the first time he was visiting Mexico, which was, of course, not the case, but the press always gets these things wrong. Somebody, I guess, told this to the press, and that's what they prepared this short note about him. But he was very visible, I think, for this particular community, sub-community within the computer science community, in spite of the fact that he was not directly involved in interacting with Mexican computer scientists, perhaps with a few exceptions. Perhaps there were a few who at some point interacted with him. I'm not sure if he had direct collaborations, but still he was friendly enough to accept having a dinner with some of us and sharing his experiences and telling us also about his own experience, not only as a professor at Stanford, but also as a regular guy. He always sort of behaved like that. You know, he tried to make things like very, very easy. He was never sort of showing off, you know, I did this and I did that. He will talk about very interesting things, his hobbies, his children, his family, his experiences at Stanford with other faculty. And this, I think, for many of us, even though we were not working in an area related to his research interest, was not only very interesting, but also very, very inspiring, because many of us thought, wow, this guy is really a great example of how we should behave if we ever become as famous as he is, which is, of course, not the case for most of us. But if we ever got there, it will be really good to keep this sort of behavior, to be very honest, very straightforward in what he planned to do and what he said, and also to be accessible in a sense, because for people working in developing countries, this is always normally an issue, that we see all these guys, even though they are Mexicans, as unreachable in a way. It's very difficult to contact them. They never reply to emails. They never reply to invitations. And if they accept to come, then it's very difficult to interact with them. That was, of course, not the case of Héctor. And Héctor not only did that, but he also went on behalf of his father. I remember one time when we invited him to Simvestab, that he told me that the car would pick him up at the entrance of Simvestab because he was going to Veracruz to get an award that was for his father, not for him. But his father could not go and say, yeah, I will go. We'll drive him 4 hours, 5 hours to Veracruz just to collect this award for his father. He was always very, very accessible. And I think in that sense, besides the interactions he had with a few people from databases, distributed systems in Mexico, I think he was always an inspiration for many of us, even people who never got to meet him.
Thank you very much. I'm going to change the order that we have defined first, because I would like to finish maybe this part. I would like to ask to Andreas if he can share us something of the experience of something anecdotic about the relationship of Héctor with the students. As you were very close to him, and you can tell us about one experience on that, please.
Yeah. One, one aspect that always puzzled me about Hector was that he was able to identify students that would work out right when they came. And sometimes that might be obvious that a student is really, really good, but very often it was not. Particularly with Asian students who are brought up to be much more polite than the rest of us, they would have trouble getting into a intellectual argument with us, with Hector, with me. Um, they were just afraid to talk back, and I always tended to interpret that as, oh, that they don't have any energy, they don't have the knowledge, the imagination to go up against me with some alternative. And I remember one student in particular. He's now faculty at a good university, uh, and I talked to Hector when Hector decided to take him on. I said, "Are you sure?" And he said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah." Um, and it worked out most of the time. I will talk about one case where it didn't work out so well, but the fact that it worked out was actually not a coincidence, because Hector then took care of those students in quite personal ways. First of all, as Jeff said, through the info lunch. Also, during every day when Hector went to lunch at a cafe on campus, he would always make the rounds in the corridor, ask anybody want to join for lunch. And often there was a group of students who would go along. Um, something I would never have done because I'm introverted, but Hector, yeah, 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 just come along. So that was helpful. But the first time a student wrote a paper, and it wasn't, usually it didn't work out very well, the first draft. They were new to the technical writing. He would actually invite them to his home on a Saturday and spend all afternoon going through that paper sentence by sentence with a student and explaining why that sentence didn't work, why a restructuring was needed, to think of the reader, to explain things like how reviewing works, that a reviewer will just kind of lose focus after a certain time. You need to grab them early and so on. And so that's why a lot of those students really worked out. Now, it didn't always work. For a while, both founders of Google were, so to speak, under Hector. Larry Page was funded by the Digital Library Project. Sergey Brin had an NSF fellowship. And, Hector did expect that students followed a particular path. He was quite tolerant in the students saying, well, look, how about this, how about that? Or even when they came in and said, I want to do that, Hector would say, fine, that's no problem. But he did need them to be persistent. And Sergey Brin was not that temperament. He would do this, he would do that. And Hector that was one type of students that Hector really couldn't interact well with. And so Sergey then changed over to Jeff Ullman, who has a different style. And so then, in his own way, then Sergey succeeded, just like Larry did. So it was very interesting to observe Hector interacting with students. So in addition, on a personal level, and Jeff explained that before, Hector's hobby was sports and portraiture photography, and most of the students brought their families, their friends, some hobby groups where they would dress up, as chickens or, whatever, to dance, to his home where he had set up a studio and did portraiture photography. And so there again, he got to know the families, and they got to know him, which meant they were just very devoted to him, the students and even the families. He had famous movie nights. He invited the entire group to his home and there was pizza and the famous Haagen-Dazs ice cream, which Hector loved and we all loved. And there would be usually a pretty cheesy movie or an adventure movie. And so that again brought the group together. So Hector had a lot of talent working with the students. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Of course, if he has take all this time for working with the students, preparing the papers, I can't imagine how it was to work with him writing a book. And I think that the person who can answer this question is Professor Urman. How is to write a book with Hector?
Well, unfortunately, that's probably you're touching on my idiosyncrasies and the way I do book writing. Um, I, I have to say, sort of my life has been writing books. What I don't have is the information to put into the books, so. In many of, I guess, the more recent books I've written, including the ones that I wrote with Hector, I was really relying on him and in parts Jennifer to decide what needs to be in the book. And then I'm really good at typing and making little examples of stuff, and I just turn it into LaTeX and boom, it's there. But let's see, since I have, I think, 4.5 minutes left. I should have, when Hector joined, and then later Jennifer Whittam, who, by the way, is now the Dean of Engineering at Stanford, when they joined the group, we sort of divided up the work of teaching database systems to people. And I think we did something that was fairly unique at the time, in that we realized that there were really two reasons to study database systems. One is because you want to be an application programmer of some sort, and you need to actually use databases and write queries. And the other is if you want to go to work for an Oracle or another database system company and actually implement database systems, and that these were really two different populations. So what we decided was that Jennifer and I would take care of what we called the first course, and we actually wrote a book called The First Course in Database Systems. That would be only for people who want to learn programming. So you'd learn, that is database programming. So you'd learn about the database model, the relational model, and so on, and the design of databases as opposed to database systems. And then Hector took over the second course, or created the second course, because there wasn't one at the time. And there, you'd learn about how to build a database management system. Learn things like concurrency control and implementation of queries and optimization of queries. He also had a third course in concurrent and distributed systems. And again, basically, I took the notes that he had developed for his class, because in those days everybody just at least handed out lecture notes. And I turned it into a book, which was, I think, fairly successful. I have to say, nobody, 20 years from now, nobody's going to remember that there was such a thing as textbooks, or let alone who wrote them. But at the time, I think it was fairly successful and certainly a good experience. I certainly learned a lot from working with Hector on the project. Anyway, I guess that's probably enough to say. Right?
We need to rush because if not, we're going to finish. We can stay here for a long time, but you know. I will ask to Carlos is from the viewpoint not of the person but the Mexican queer science community discipline more so the viewpoint of the discipline. What's the legacy to the Mexicans or to the person who is in this discipline of Hector?
I think there is one important legacy in his publications, his books, his papers, but also as a source of inspiration for many Mexicans who want to pursue a graduate degree in computer science in Mexico or abroad. For many people, I think he has been a great inspiration, showing that it is possible to enter a top university and not only to graduate from there, but also become a member of the faculty and chair of the computer science department, as Héctor was. And in that regard, I think is one of those role models that when we are young, we want to follow, we want to have. It's not the same if the role model is somebody from the US or from Germany, France, as if it is from Mexico, because it looks more reachable to us in a way. But there is also another legacy that hasn't been mentioned yet at the table, but I guess I can give some information about this cátedra that will be created, like a lecture with Héctor's name, and Professor Ullman has been raising money for that. There is a plan to have this cátedra in Mexico, initially at Simbestab at UNAM rotating. I believe CIMAT now wants to join as well. They will bring a top computer scientist to Mexico to visit, for short visits, and will be paid directly with this fund to preserve Héctor's legacy. I think this is a fantastic idea, a great initiative, and will also motivate a lot to our computer science departments in Mexico. The community in Mexico is relatively small, the community of computer scientists as compared to other countries. And this will be, I think, another very important way to preserve his name and for young people, young generations to find out who Héctor was, those who were not lucky enough to meet him. So this is another way to sort of go on his legacy. But as I said, it's not the only one. Also the work he did, of course, and this source of inspiration will stay there for a long time, I believe.
Thank you very much. And I know that Professor Roman is very involved in this part of the project of this cátedra. Please, could you say us a bit more about that?
Well, I think there's not all that much more to say. I guess I've been for a year now, so I've been talking with Professor Rodriguez, and I think you mentioned Professor Roxbaum, and they suggested that appropriate memorial would be, you know, as was just said, an annual lecture in Hector's name, and so we're. Fundraising is a new experience for me, but I think we're doing okay. It's a little complicated because a lot of the money is being raised in the United States, and the tax laws in the United States, well, they just make it complicated. Let's. I don't want to get involved in this. At any rate, I'm optimistic that we will have enough to fund a pretty reasonable lecture series each year, and we're hoping for the best.
Thank you. Andreas, could you share some of the something anecdotal about the meetings of? Okay, you have shared some of them, but there's something that I would like to add about this business meeting or working meeting with Héctor.
Yes, so I'm running a timer here, but if you need time, just interrupt me. You know, what I say is always modular. So it was sometimes an adventure. We did a lot of traveling together to a lot of meetings, but then the digital library project in particular, the one that our collaboration started with, was quite popular, kind of worldwide, and so we had a lot of people and delegations coming coming from across the world, really. And so then, and Hector and I were used to just giving our song and dance about the project. And so Hector came to my office one day and said, "Oh, there's a Japanese delegation. They, can you, come and we'll do our thing." And there was this whole group of the Japanese delegation. We herded them into a room, and then Hector and I talked about digital libraries, and they all nodded and smiled very nicely, and then they left, and we all bowed as well as we knew how to, and that was that. Everybody went back to work, and a week later, Hector's secretary Marianne came in and said, "Hector, there's a Japanese delegation wanting to hear about digital libraries," and Hector said, "No, that was last week." Well, there was a Japanese delegation, and it turned out that Hector had entered the date incorrectly in his calendar, and there just happened to be the week earlier a Japanese delegation on the wrong floor. They were actually looking for someone to tell them about supercomputing at Stanford, and they were all just too polite to ask us, well, what does what you're saying have to do with supercomputing? So sometimes things went wrong a little bit. Now, it was funny to hear Carlos, I think it was, talk about a business class. So Hector had very long legs, and yes, he loved flying business class. And he always, Stanford doesn't pay for that, and so he always used his prolific points to do that. And so we would enter the plane together, and then so there we were, and then it was the end of the walk for Hector. But then I would continue on into the sardine section, and Hector always felt embarrassed. He said that he was in business class, I wasn't, and it was the money that his efforts had raised, and yet he felt embarrassed, and so that it was another wonderful side of Hector. I always assumed him that I'm short and fat, and that's much easier than his physique. So. Now, I mentioned a little bit, Hector, yes, he was very charming, everybody, but he had a fist underneath that velvet glove. And it showed in a number of ways. Sometimes it showed when he was, for a while, chair of the department, or I think when he wanted something, it really did happen. And I saw it on a smaller scale. One of the government agencies got it into his head that it wanted a new style of progress reports. They called it earned value. And it was this complicated thing where, you had listed what you were going to do in your proposal, and then you slowly, year by year or whatever, you fulfilled that, and then you got these mathematical credits towards what you, and so on. And so they wanted our progress reports that way. So they came for a site visit, and they brought a specialist, a consultant in earned value. And he was very kind of arrogant, the consultant. And Hector came prepared, and he took that consultant apart piece by piece, just laying the fragments, the defective fragments of earned value down on the table until the funders decided, at the end of that session, okay, we won't use it. So you didn't want to meddle with Hector particularly. Last thing, he was not afraid to ask naive questions, which freed us to ask naive questions. By naive, I mean, exposing ignorance. He would just my timer. Yeah, he would just go ahead and ask it, and people answered, and he would learn. And that was that. Freed everybody, showed students not to be afraid to do that.
Thank you. Carlos, do you have some anecdotic experience, something like that?
Well, I have a couple of stories. He shared at the dinner we had at Sergio's house. As I say, he was very friendly, and he was a great talker. he will really get you into all his stories, the way he told them, pretty much like his presentations. And I remember a couple of things he said, a couple of very interesting stories, at least for me. One of them has to do with his hobby with photography. He said that one day, this legendary computer scientist, Donald Knuth, told him, Héctor, I have these books in my house, and I would like to have really good pictures, and I know you're really very good at photography. So could you come to my house and get those photos from me? Yeah, sure. And then he told us that Donald Knuth had these different editions of his famous books in different languages. And they were sort of sorted by size and color, very, very carefully. And he had to get photographs from different angles and asking Donald Knuth, is this okay? Do you like it like this? And he spent quite some time apparently getting these photos for him. And he was so proud of his photos. He was impressed. He really liked them. And he told us also about this first server set up by the founders of Google at Stanford. He said they managed to get some money, but they wanted to optimize the use of the money, so they put all the money into sort of equipment they were getting, the processor, the memory, and all this. And then they realized they didn't have enough money for the case. And they said, what should we do? And then somebody came out with the idea of using Lego blocks for this. And they put Lego blocks for this first server, which, according to Héctor, was still at Stanford as a museum piece to remember this event. And he was so proud when he talked about this also, saying, these guys, they were very good. They figured out. I knew they would figure it out. So he told us many, many stories, even about his personal life, talking about his wife, that she was always happy to live in the US, and one day she decided she wanted to go back to Monterrey, and said, why do you want to go back to Monterrey? I have sort of done my life here. I like Monterrey, but my career, my life is here. And they had discussions about that. And he will also tell us that he was sort of very, very happy with his life. And you could feel it when you talked to him, that he was so satisfied with his life without the need of showing off anything, right? It's just, you could see the way he talked, the way he expressed about himself. He will be totally honest in the way he described the things in which he participated or he wanted to tell in this sort of dinner stories. And for us, at least for me, I didn't feel like a stranger, like I who was just meeting him for the first time or talking to him for the first time. I felt, as Sergio said, as a long-time friend, because it was part of the magic of being with this guy, that he made you feel like that. And then you felt, I could ask him anything. And I think he will tell me. He will give me a very honest answer. So this, I like it a lot.
Okay, one the last part of this round table. Just we'll ask to panelists just a final comment or final answer or final line about Héctor. Please, Professor Urban.
I think Stanford suffered greatly from his loss. Sigh.
Yes. Andreas, please.
Yeah, I mean, you've probably gathered from what I was saying that that Hector, was a huge figure in my life, in my career, and by extension, my family. He was just very, very important, and obviously important to all his students. And he used to say, because he had so many that he graduated, he said that he won't get into a nursing home. He would just travel from student to student and stay with them each for a month or two after he retired. And unfortunately, that did not happen. And I still, literally, I dream of him quite a bit at night. And there are many little events that happen that make me think of him and wish that I could tell him about it.
Thank you, Andreas. Carlos?
All I can say is I think we're all going to miss him. I remember when we got the news about his death, and it was very shocking, and actually some people were trying to confirm if this was true because we could not believe it. We knew he was not that old. I wasn't aware of any illnesses. So when he passed away, it was very shocking for many of us. And he will be remembered, I think, for Mexicans as a great Mexican who was able to show us that it's possible to fulfill a dream of pursuing a research career, a very successful research career in top universities in the US, and that you can still keep being a gentle person and somebody that is reachable by people who are unknown, who probably don't even know the things that you have done as a scientist, and setting an example also for new generations, I guess also in the US as much as it is in Mexico. And I think is a great example for all of us, for all the computer scientists, all scientists in general, regardless of nationality.
Thank you, thank you. We have time for a question or a couple of questions. Do you have some or comments? Okay, let me say that the idea of this roundtable was to present, to review part of the life or view part of the life of Héctor in a different way that information you can find in the internet and Wikipedia, to show what the human part of Héctor and more, I think the words of Carlos they are very very illustrative of what we think about Héctor. It was a huge loss. Uh, he is an example for all the people, for all the students, and for the professors who work with others, with the students and colleges. Of course, this is not a complete review of all the contribution of Héctor. The idea is, I think the last sentence is, if you want to know more about him, just Google him. Thank you very much. Ah, yes, of course. Sorry.
I just want to ask maybe Professor Ullman here and Andreas that they knew better about Héctor's career. In your opinion, if you go to a remote island and you can only bring one of the works of Héctor, which one would you say that is the best, the one that endured more the test of time? The books, the papers? What would you say about it? Thank you.
Andreas, do you want to say something?
Mm.
I'm looking at.
Yeah, that is a difficult one. I mean, you know what his books and his papers don't mean as much to me. So on that island, I would, you know, it sounds corny, you know, I know, but I would take my memories of him and my understanding that it is possible to be sociable and yet competent and assertive when it needs to be. And I'm sure that is needed on an island as well. And you know, I talked to Hector, you know, as towards the end, and I said, you know, but Hector, this is too early. And he said, well, you know, it's always too early. And so that is an insight that I think I also would take to the island.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much for all you to being here. Thank you, and please give a applause to our panelists. And thank you very much, Andreas. Thank you very much, Professor. The idea of this roundtable about the legacy of